Okay, the physical properties of the garments. I'm going to be using the images and description and explanation found in the official manual for Marvelous Designer. I think it's a decent explanation, and those things, those settings, they should be played around, because you might have results looking, well, different depending on the kind of clothing that you have, depending on the design that you have. So I will be generalizing a lot of these things, and I will be following the manual. When we choose a preset, when we choose a material in here, we get details of the material. We get bending, we get stiffness, we get density, and all of those things. And if you modify the details and you like what you did, you can either save the preset itself by clicking this little button over here, or you can save the whole material by clicking this button. And briefly, to talk about some of those things in here, I'm going to mention the ones that have those numbers at the end. And S stands for single. And I'm not going to explain exactly what that is, because I'm not that technical. But one thing to understand is that the bigger the number, the finer is the material, the lighter is the material. Meaning that if, for example, muslin that has 20S, it's going to be heavier and more stiff than the muslin that has 60S. So this is just something to keep in mind, and perhaps to explain what those things are, so you can instead of trying every single one of them, you can understand what those things do and select the muslin or cotton that you want. The first setting I'm going to talk about is the stretch for weft and for warp. And what's important to keep in mind when going through the settings is what weft and what warp are. And to refresh the memory, weft stands for horizontal threads and warp stands for vertical threads. When you remember those things, those settings, the details are going to be more easily understandable. So, stretch and warp. The thing about the settings, the numbers, it's not the number of the stretching, it's actually the number of resistance against the stretching. So if we make the number higher, if we set it to 90, let's say, the material is going to be more stiff. If we set it to 2, it's going to be more light. It's going to be stretching quite a lot. And to help us understand this a little bit better, if we click this little triangle, we can see that there's a stiffness and there's a mathematical equation next to it. So look what happens if we change the number. If I go from 2 to 41, the stiffness changes, it increases. If we go higher, the stiffness increases, and so on. So the bigger the number that we set here, the stiffer the material is. And we can individually modify the stretching of the weft and the stretching of the warp. So there is quite a bit of degree and flexibility when it comes to defining the material in this way. And in the manual, this is what they give us as an image. This line indicates weft, this one indicates warp. And those two are for shear. And shear is diagonals. It's not weft, it's not warp, it's the grain that goes diagonally, basically. And it works kind of the same way. We have the stiffness in here as well, so if we increase it, you can see that the stiffness increases. So for stretching, there are 3 modifiers that we can use to define the material. The next setting is bending, weft and warp, right here. And just like with stretching, one thing to remember is that we're not changing the intensity of the bending, but we're actually defining the resistance against bending. So the higher the number that we set here, the higher the resistance the stiffer the material is. And to illustrate this a little bit better, I'm going to use another image from the manual, and we'll begin with the first one. As we can see, we have bending on the weft set to 57. So weft is this line, so it means that those edges, let's say this edge on the left and this edge on the right, if we were to bend this rectangle in such a way that we wanted those edges to touch each other, if we set in the weft settings, we set something other than 0, there's going to be resistance against this kind of action. And if we look here, this is exactly what we have on the illustration. If we look at those folds, they have 0 force set to them, so the folds are kind of smaller and thinner. Basically the edges are closer to each other. But when we have the force set to 57, as we can see, the folds are bulkier, and it means that there's more distance between those edges, so bending doesn't happen as easily as the warp bending. And in this setting is basically reversed. We have some force set to warp, and we have no force set to weft. So in this case, if we were to bend this rectangular in such a way that we wanted this bottom edge to touch this top edge, there was some force set. If there was some bending set, in this case this is 57, this is what happens. We have bigger folds, we have more distance between the edges, so bending happens harder, there's more stiffness in here. And where there is no resistance, where there is no force, we can see the folds are smaller.
If you enjoy this content or find it useful, please consider supporting me by buying me a cup of coffee via the link in the description.
The next one is buckling ratio, right here. And this time around it's no resistance. This is this actually percentage. We tell the program in percent how high or how low the buckling ratio is. And if we click on this little rectangular, we can see that there's the numbers can go only from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%. And this settings determines how easily bendable the material is. So in the example from the manual, on the left we can see that the buckling ratio is set to 0 and the folds are very thick and very rough. Whereas on the right, when the buckling ratio is set to almost 100%, the material is bending more easily. The folds are thinner, and inside of those folds there are even more folds. There are small wrinkles happening. So this material, it's very, very fine. It's very thin. It's something like silk. So this to understand this buckling setting is to remember this picture, or to simply know that this dictates just how easily bendable the material is going to be. The higher the number, the more easy it bends. The lower the number, the harder it becomes. The next one is buckling stiffness, and this works with bending. So those numbers that we set in buckling stiffness weft, for example, will work with the number that we have set in bending weft. In the illustration they have some numbers set in here, and in the manual it's given a little bit of math equation explaining that those 80% actually work with those numbers. But to remove all of this math from a process that shouldn't require any math, we can simply refer to the manual, which says that the higher the buckling ratio, the harder it is to fold the corner of the fabric. And we can see that in this illustration. We can see that we have 80 set to buckling stiffness, and we can see just how poorly the garment the material folds, whereas if the stiffness at 0, we can see a thinner lines coming from here. So this setting is a little bit more complex because it doesn't work on itself, it doesn't work individually, but it takes in consideration what we have set in bending settings. The next one is density, almost at the bottom, and this is simply defines just how heavy the material is going to be, and this illustration shows it fairly well. If we look on the left, we can see that there's a little bit of flaring out going on when the material bends on this. I guess there's some kind of table. And on the right, we can see that the fabric folds in a very nice way. It's there's no flaring out happening. There's nothing like that. It's dropping all the way down, and this is a very good setting if we want to make certain parts of the design of the garments to have a little bit of heavier look. And this works really well on hoods, it works really well on skirts, and sometimes on pants if we want the folds not to be staying somewhere on the knees but actually dropping down and accumulating above the feet, for example. So this setting is very easy to understand. It gives you immediate results. It just very much recommended to give it a try. And the last one, very good as well. Not exactly a good image from the manual because it's almost impossible to understand what is happening, but friction is exactly that. It's friction. It's the friction between the garments. If you ever found yourself in a situation where you have garments on top of other garments, when you have layered clothing, and you find that the layers that at the top are sliding on the garments underneath, to prevent this from happening, we need to simply increase this setting. This is the friction that defines just how slippery the surface of the garments are. So if you don't want your vests and belts and some other things that are lying on top of other garments to slipping down or slipping up and not doing all those kind of things, simply go all the way down to the settings and increase the friction. And the very last setting to talk about is the thickness, and every material has thickness set by default, and this doesn't require any explanation. If we change this to, let's say, 5, we can see what happens on the model. If we set it to 10, this is the result.